So in this video, I'm going to explain how to structure a very simple chord progression. Now this video is mostly targeted at guitar players. There's going to be a lot of themes related to guitar, but it can really be applied to anybody. And there's two tools that we're going to use in this video to help us with this. Now I know that there's a lot of people who are first starting out. They don't really know much about music theory. So one of the tools I'm going to be introducing is going to really help us sidestep that part of it. It's a tool called Hookpad that has a free version that you can use for compositional purposes. There's a paid version that expands what it can actually do, but it's not really necessary for the beginner. Even for advanced users, it's use case oriented. So I very much recommend using that tool. The second tool we're going to use is guitarpro. Now, if you don't know what guitarpro is, you really do need to look into it as a guitar player specifically. It's a tool that's been around for about 20 years. It's mostly used for composition by songwriters, but also by many hobbyists who use it to play back tablatures of known songs so that they could learn them. So we're going to be using both here. Hookpad to help us write the chord progression, and then a guitarpro in order for us to capture it, write it down for posterity so that we can come back to it later. So here we are right now on the Hookpad main screen. And there's two elements that we're going to need to first decide in relation to our chord progression. The first is going to be the tempo of the song that we're going to be authoring. And let's say for this song we want to go with 100 BPM. So here we have this section that we can click on for the tempo. And we can type in 100. And now we're at 100 BPM. The next thing we have to decide is the key of the song. Now, for novice guitar players, the best keys to play in are E minor, the respective relative major, which is G, A minor, and the relative major, which is C. So here we're going to be working in A minor. I think a lot of rock songs are written in the minor key, so we're going to mostly do that. We'll pop mostly in major, but nonetheless, we're going to be working in minor in this video. And to do that in Hookpad, we're going to select this button here under key, select A, and then minor. And what this does is this populates this upper section over here with the respective chords that we are allowed to actually use. Now the beautiful thing about Hookpad is that once you have your key selected, it tells you everything you're allowed to do, and then it excludes everything you're not allowed to do, meaning that if you can add something, it's pretty much proper in terms of music theory. Now, music theory is not some sort of law of nature that you have to stick to, but it is a good guide when you're starting out in order to structure your compositions so that when you do get a grasp of what it's really about, you can forego some of the rules that, don't need to be there when you kind of know what you're doing. But for us, we're going to stick very much within the system, within how Hookpad's recommending and what we're actually allowed to do here. So let's start by adding a chord. So if we hit the mouse button somewhere within this line, we will have this view. If we click it within these set of middle bars, we'll get a harmony view, which we're not going to work with here. So we're just going to stick to the chord view. We'll start with an A minor chord. Now, an A minor chord is the root of the key that we're working in. Now, it's not a bad idea to start your progression with the root, and the reason for this is that it starts to anchor in the listener's perspective into the key that the song is in. You don't have to start it from the root, but for our example, we're going to do this. And also for looping purposes, it's not a bad idea because coming back to the root always resolves nicely, so there's a pleasant kind of vibe to the progression itself. Now, here if we look, we're going to notice a few things. Firstly, that we have Roman numerals listed on each of these chords. Some are in uppercase, some are in lowercase. So the lowercase Roman numerals indicate that the chord is a minor chord. The uppercase Roman numeral indicates that it's a major chord. Now this one is the only exception, which has this little circle here, and that indicates it's a diminished chord. We're not really going to work with diminished chords. This isn't really a video on music theory itself. We're just going to ignore it for the purposes here. We're going to stick to the minor and the major chords. So we've added an E minor. Let's add a few more chords. Normally we'll compose in bars of 4 and then loop them. So let's try that first. Click here. Say C, D, and E minor. Now let's play back this progression. It's going to be fairly simple, just one chord per bar, and we'll stick to that here. It's kind of okay, but I think we could do a bit better. What if we swap out this C for an F, and we swap out this D for the C? Now let's see what happens when we play this. That's sounding pretty decent. It has that kind of positive, uplifting, triumphant vibe, moving from the A minor to the F and then to the C. Two major chords, two minor chords, so it's kind of a mixture of the two moods of happy and sad. It's a nice progression. Now you could experiment as much as you'd like in combinations of these chords. If you want, you can shorten them and drag them around. We're not going to really be doing that for the purposes of this video. We're going to stick here. But we need to evaluate our progression now to see how it sounds like as a loop. So what we can do in Hookpad here, we can hold the left mouse button in this area. It turns yellow. Drag it across our 4 bars. Then click back to the beginning and play it and listen to it loop through and see what that sounds like. So that change actually sounds pretty good, going from the 5th to the 1st, from the E minor to the A minor. And it has to sound good. The 4th and the 5th, if we look here in our intervals, they mean something. There's something special in terms of the minor scale, and every scale for that matter. They're what are referred to as cadence chords, meaning that the 4th and the 5th have this natural pull of the ear back to the root, back to the 1st here. So both of these chords would work really well as an ending chord to our progression to return back to the root. And it has a nice resolution to it. And this is partially why we end these in cadence chords. So you don't have to, and it's not recommended to do it all the time. Many pop songs, many rock songs that have been popular really use like a 3-chord progression where they double up on one of the chords for 2 bars and then they have 2 changes, or 4 chords like you see here. Now another useful thing to note about this, just as a music theory element, is that the numbering of these chords themselves, if you look at YouTube videos looking for chord progressions, oftentimes they do give you a Roman numeral listing of a chord progression. So this one's a 1, 6, 3, 5 chord progression. That's what we composed here, and sounds good. So let's convert it over into, say, an 8-bar progression. So what we could do is remove this looping, hold down the left mouse button, highlight those 3, Control-C to copy, go here, Control-V to paste, and now we have 2 loops of it. Now the reason I added the second loop is because we want to make a minor change here, perhaps to the root. So in Hookpad, there's a section of the screen here to the right that allows us to make alterations to any of the chords themselves. So for example, we can make this A minor chord into a 1st inversion A minor, a 2nd inversion A minor, into a 7th chord, into a 9th chord, and so on. Now, this is very useful because you don't have to know any music theory to know that any of these changes, they kind of work. They don't always work in combinations with each other, and they're not supposed to, even in music theory, but they all work within the key that you're working in. So you know that generally it's all going to sound good. Now, whether your composition as a whole sounds good is a different story, but musically wise, it's correct, and you can make it work. You can definitely make it work. You're not going to get that jarring dissonance that you would get from introducing a completely out-of-key note. Okay, so we have this chord progression loop twice. Let's change up the A minor on our first repetition to be, I don't know, like say a 2nd inversion. It doesn't really matter too much, but let's say we're going to do a 2nd inversion here. So what does this sound like going from the beginning? It's going to be a bit different. So that's not really particularly nice. Maybe we want to take that back. And maybe we want to alter the F, swap it out for something else. It starts to feel, now that we've listened to this progression a few times, it starts to feel a little too familiar. So maybe we can swap this out with, I don't know, let's try the inversions to see if we can alter this chord enough. That's too similar. What would that be like? I kind of dig the vibe. It's more for a song that's more melancholic. I kind of like it. I kind of like it on its own. It's a little bit rough around the edges in places, but I think that's part of the voicing of the chords themselves. We're not going to be voicing them any differently in this video itself. We're just going to play straight up one note per bar. But if you were to voice it a little bit differently, I think it would be quite pleasant. So let's keep our chord progression here. And now let's write it down. So we've been listening to a piano rendition with a specific type of rhythm to it, and we don't really want that, and we want to capture this and listen to it in terms of a guitar progression. So we'll move out of Hookpad and we'll move into guitarpro. So I have guitarpro loaded here, and we have an empty new file to work with. So the first thing we're going to want to do in guitarpro is set the tempo. I want to keep things similar between Hookpad and the file that I'm working on. So we're going to set the tempo to 100. It's this little box over here. Now we have our tempo to 100, and there's no real setting of a key in guitarpro, but I like to add the key of the song itself to the title or somewhere within the metadata so that I know when I return to it what key I was originally authoring the song against. So let's just call it a A minor song. And that sounds pretty good. Now, our chord progression is A minor, F major, C major, E minor. So let's capture that in here. So back in guitarpro, we can do this a number of ways. And they're all useful, and I'm going to show you two of them. If we click on Tools, we go to Scales. We will get a view here that's going to be very useful for us when we're doing leads or when we're improvising. So what we can do here is we're offered a view in which we can select a key and the respective scale it corresponds to, and we're going to be given a fretboard display of all the notes that are allowable on this in this key. So this is similar to what's presented to us in Hookpad, except this is for a guitar specifically, and this gives us a nice visual cue when we're practicing or improvising on what we can and cannot do without going astray. So we are in the key of A minor. So in the keynote here, we will choose A. And here we have natural minor, which is, by the way, the same as the sixth mode of major as Aeolian. If you notice, this fretboard is not going to change if I switch between those, but it would change between, say, major and minor. So it doesn't matter why, we're going to stick to natural minor and leave it here. Now what we can do is we can write out our chords directly through the fretboard, or we can do or we can use the number keys themselves. So for an A minor chord, the familiar shape would be something like the open A, E, A, C, E. So that gives us basically the standard A minor chord. Now what we want to do is set it up here as a whole note, so you have the notes to choose from that you're actually authoring, and you have now your chord, your A minor chord, as a one bar whole note, and it's going to play all the way through. Now let's add some of the other chords, but let's add them in a bit more of a clever guitarpro way. So the second chord is an F major. So we can hit on the bar, we still have our whole note selected, we can hit the A key, and now we have this chord tool that is built into guitarpro. And this allows us to add chords quite easily. So the chord we want is an F major. So the type of the chord is displayed from this drop down. The capital M means major. The small case m means minor, and then you have augmented, diminished, suspended, sixth, and so on. But we're working with the major here. Now, in this alternatives view, we have all the options of voicing it as a single chord. So if you explore here the different chord types, you notice these are all F major chords. They're just positioned differently on the fretboard. So this is the one we're all used to. It's a bar chord. This one over here is a little bit better for beginners because it doesn't require the full bar, and it's an easier transition to make from the A minor into the F. So let's choose this voicing of it so far. Now, that was added, and a letter of the chord was also added to it. So now we have C major, E minor, and we're going to do it the same way. C major, and we'll stick with the standard voicing because it's easy to fret. Then we'll go to E minor, hit A, E, and then from the drop down select this lowercase m, and now we have the standard voicing here. And we have that. Now we have A minor and then F major 7, so let's go to A minor. What we can do is we could just copy this instead of going through the chord browser, and you do that by highlighting the bar, Control C, clicking into the new bar, Control V, and now we're set. Now here we have this F major 7, so let's see if we can build that with the chord builder. Hit A, F major, and then we want F major 7. The 7M is the type of chord we're building. So let's just choose, this one looks easy enough to play, just 2 fingers, 4 bottom strings. Let's choose that. And then the last 2 were the same, so C major and E minor, we can copy those. So those were C major and E minor. And now we have our whole chord progression. So let's play it here in guitarpro, see what it sounds like. That F major 7 actually sounds pretty good. It sounds better voiced in guitarpro on a guitar than it did on Hookpad and inside the piano rhythm that we had. So yeah. Now this is just a chord progression. Now what's important about it is that this voicing, meaning the one full strum of it per bar, is not how you necessarily want to voice your chord progression. You can transform these individual chords into whatever voicings you'd want. One example of how to do this is a simple arpeggiation. So instead of playing all these notes here at the same time, what we can do to play the same chord, because we're only going to use the same notes as the chord, is instead of this A minor as one individual strum, let's pick, say, 8th notes. Pressing the delete key, we remove these other notes, and then we can construct the arpeggiated version. Two. So here it tells us the bar is full, and there we have it. So this voicing of this chord would sound like. So maybe we can arpeggiate this one as well, and then we'll have a new voicing. So this is an E minor, so let's delete that. 8th notes. And let's make it a little different. Yeah. Okay, let's see what that sounds like. See, now that we started voicing the chord progression, it's starting to sound more like music. So let's listen to what we've composed so far and maybe call it a day. Okay. So I hope you learned something today. The two tools, Hookpad and guitarpro, very much recommended. I don't know if there's a trial version of guitarpro. There probably is, but I know it's generally a paid-for app. It's not particularly expensive, and I think it's amazing, so I do recommend it. Hookpad, the free version, is more than adequate. I think unless you're getting into heavy composition and heavy use, there's no reason really to pay for it. So yeah, I hope this has been a useful video. Thank you. Cheers.